From the United Nations Office to the African Union, this is She Stands for Peace, a podcast series where I explore the state of the women, peace, and security agenda in Africa through a series of conversations with key actors. In the podcast, we ask the central question 20 years after UNSCR 1325, how far have we come? I'm Dr. Obiageli, your host, and today I'm joined by Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili, co-founder of the Bring Back Our Girls movement. Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili joins me from Abuja, Nigeria, and we have a conversation about inspiring and organizing the next generation of peace builders and the wider peace and development nexus. Obi Ezekwesili, it's a pleasure to speak to you today. Now, it was at the UNESCO event in 2014 in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, that in front of 2,000 people, you made the call to the then President Goodluck Jonathan to bring back our daughters in reference to the schoolgirls that were abducted by Boko Haram in Chibok. Now, your words were tweeted as an hashtag, bring back our girls, and that started a global movement. And at the core of that movement were two main issues. One, the abduction of girls generally during conflict, but critical to the global conversation was also the location of that abduction, the fact that it was at the educational institution, which spoke more widely to issues around the education of the girl child and how Islamic terrorist groups prevent this in other countries. So we have the example in Pakistan, for example, with Malala Yousafzai. So Obi Ezekwesili, first, tell us about your reflections on that period, the trending hashtag, and the impact that it had.
Thank you so much, Yemisi. The first thing is to just sort of give a context that was earlier than the abduction of Chibok girls, and that was the gruesome murder and burning of the corpses of schoolboys at the federal government college Buni Yadi. That had happened in February of the same year, 2014. And I did express it to my husband. I said, I have a foreboding that a wrong signal has been given to terrorists concerning schools, and that I worry about what this could mean. Then, some weeks, 6 weeks maybe later, we woke up and read about more than 100 girls abducted from their school in Borno, northern Nigeria, on BBC, because BBC, I follow them, and so on my timeline on Twitter, I saw that. And I asked them and said, is this verified? And after I did that, then I answered my own question, because I thought, it's BBC. It's not any other, online read, what do you call these fluffy papers or whatever, or news outlets. And I said, this is BBC. So they have put out something without there being a real confirmation. So that's when I really worried. I became frantic and I started tweeting at all the handles of government and saying, have you seen this? Go after these people. The military, I tweeted at their handle. I tweeted at the police. I said, go after these people. If they've taken these girls, and for me, it was like, these are girls. Oh my goodness. 1,000 things could go wrong with this situation. So I was very agitated about it and started the tweeting. So what you refer to as the UNESCO event in Port Harcourt only happened some 9 days after I'd, gone on prolific tweeting. There was no news about the tragedy in the mainstream media. It was almost like silence on the matter of the girls. Before you ever heard me say, bring back our daughters at the UNESCO event, I had a hashtag that was saying, where are our 85 daughters? The rest of it became my asking the entire audience of people at the event in Port Harcourt. It was a World Book Capital event, and Port Harcourt was taken over from the city in Thailand, Bangkok, as the new World Book Capital. And so I asked everybody in the audience and people watching live at home to rise and show solidarity for the girls, because I felt as an individual that I had a duty to the girls. And I called it the duty of my shared humanity. I imagined the girls as my daughters and how I would react in a situation where they are faced with grave danger. And then the third part of it was I realized my responsibility as one who had led education policy in our country and one who had made the education of the girl child a key part of my reforms. And it targeted the Borno state as well as Yobe state and Adamawa state in the north, because those are states where the number of girls in school pale in comparison to the boys in school in the north or to girls in school in the south. And so it was so important for me that my voice should be out there to amplify their voice. Because I mean, my voice could attract attention, but not the voice of the parents who were out in Borno State crying for help and wanting to go into the forest in search of their children.
Unfortunately, insecurity in the region hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. At least 100 of the Chibok girls, as they were called, is still missing. And just a few months ago, 300 schoolgirls were abducted in Zamfara state, and we continue to see cases of abductions in the north and all over the country, frankly. A report by Amnesty International released in April 2021 said that since December 2020, over 600 schools in northern Nigeria have closed due to insecurity. Now, I know that the members of the Bring Back Our Girls movement vow that they will meet daily at Unity Fountain in Abuja until the girls abducted are returned. But the thing is that I think now we're finding that the world is no longer shocked enough for hashtags to trend when there's a new group of abductees in the same way that we saw with Bring Back Our Girls. But we still need to continue to talk about it. And in order for us to effect some kind of change and action. Now, the government of Nigeria recently banned the use of Twitter in the country, and several other African countries have also initiated some more stringent social media regulations. So, what are your thoughts on this in terms of encouraging youth participation in politics and governance in Africa in relation to the Women, Peace and Security agenda?
We do know that the core responsibility of every government is to secure the lives and the properties of citizens and those who live within their borders. And that the legitimacy of any government is questionable when it cannot guarantee life. When governments do not uphold the dignity of the human life, then there is a problem. Because what else can you lose greater than losing life? And so, when you want to know how effective governance is, you need to be saying, how do governments across the world respond to the death of a citizen, a preventable death of a citizen? When you look in terms of the security architecture of any society, which we know clearly puts government right smack in charge. And so anything around peace and security has to look at the the quality of governance, the quality, the resilience of institutions of governance to actually function and to provide the kind of outcomes that are desirable for the well-being of citizens.
Now, going back a few years now, as vice president of the World Bank's Africa Region program, you led several programs that were aimed at supporting women in conflict and post conflict environments. You also worked in a number of countries, focusing especially around the economic capacity development and financial inclusion of women. What were your most memorable moments in terms of work that for you really demonstrated the importance of economic empowerment of women as part of the wider women, peace, and security agenda in Africa?
One of my memorable ones is when I got our team to focus on how infrastructure helps enhance the productivity of the African women. Something as basic as that. If you don't design infrastructure to be beneficial to women, it would simply be a mass of some physical things that mean nothing. and they would not be valuable to the enhancing women's productivity. That for me was so critical. So in terms of investment in infrastructure as well as investment in the analytical studies that were important to direct those investments. I was very pleased with that aspect of my work across the countries. But one person who was an ally in doing that was then President Sirleaf Johnson. Because we used Liberia as a profile country to get into that particular aspect of development. Another aspect, of course, is the matter of access to finance. The very important knowledge that we gained was that beyond improving the capacity of women, whether it was training programs that improved the capacity of the woman in agriculture or the woman in just basic trade, or women in other, maybe in tourism and those kinds of related sectors on the continent, or in mining. We had, sustainable mining practices, especially women in mining and all of that. If we did not sort of think through access to finance, you were going to leave the women halfway through. So they would have the capacity, but they don't have the money. They just the basic start-off money to go some steps further. So the kind of partnerships that I forged with my colleagues at the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, because that's the arm of the bank that is directly focused on interventions with private sector. And so by bringing the policy side and then the money side together and having the women be recipients of the kind of support that we as a development institution could give, we basically were now able to show examples of women who could get those kinds of supports and become really successful entrepreneurs. The third part was, our focus on basic education, secondary education, and tertiary education. Before I got to the bank had a bad reputation on the continent, as having said to the continent that all it needed was basic education, and that it pulled support for tertiary education in most of Africa. Well, that did not continue during my time. And so, making sure that we got both basic education, secondary education, and tertiary education back on our table, but doing it in the way that we were being guided by the evidence from our various studies on the necessity for our women not to be left behind. We were seeing indicators that, both in terms of parity of enrollment, women were struggling. We were seeing that in terms of the relevance of the knowledge, women were struggling. We were seeing that in terms of completion rate, women were struggling across different regions of the continent. And so we focused on changing that and working with the governments to change that. The most important thing for me was really influencing the policies of countries toward their women, the gender policies, making sure that presidents, which most often, as you know, were men. There were only two women who intersected as presidents with me when I was vice president at the bank. It was Sirleaf Johnson and it was Banda. They were the only two women that were, all the rest were my interlocutors as presidents of countries were men. And so I became a champion for they understanding the power of having really competent women in their cabinets, in their legislature, and then made sure that they understood the power of ensuring equality of opportunity for their girls and their boys. And I began to use very simple examples of how the household income of families that allowed their girls to do well, to get the opportunity of education, is considerably better than that of families that did not. And I would say to them that it's similar to countries that have made sure that their girls got the same opportunities as their boys to be educated are the ones at the top level of the global economic league table. And so, if your country wants to begin to climb up there, Mr. President, you have to make sure that your girls, your women gain the same opportunities to be productive, to be competitive, like your boys and your men. And it resonated because I was an example to them of how you could train a girl child and she would be able to hold her own in the world.
As Nigeria's Minister of Education between 2006 and 2007, you actually implemented the gender parity in education program in northern Nigeria, a region where, thanks to Islamic terrorist group Boko Haram, has become engulfed in conflict since the early 2000s. But clearly, your work demonstrates that you see education as the path towards fixing the violence we see in countries like Nigeria. And in the book, She Stands for Peace, you actually said, and I quote you, you said, education helps to protect communities and is definitely a preventative measure against violence. And from your academy from your School of Politics and Governance to how you have continued to monitor the progress and education of the women and girls that were rescued or who have escaped captivity by Boko Haram and all the work that you've done around education of women. So, reflecting on education of youth as a catalyst for change in addressing conflict in Africa, what would you ask member states, so African member states, to be doing in this regard, particularly in encouraging and nurturing a new generation of thinkers on the continent?
I think that our leaders need a human capital centered economic growth strategy. They haven't, when I look at economic vision that a lot of our leaders are designed for their countries, I still pick a lot of holes in it. They make natural resources the epicenter of the way that they are imagining their countries. No, I need the leaders to begin to look at every young person, every child they see, every child born into your country, immediately look at them as the economic agents that will transform your country. Because those children, those young people are carrying the creativity, the innovation, the productivity, the competitiveness that will transform Africa. The 21st century world, post COVID recovery world, is not a world that is going to be about natural resources. It is a world that is now more and more about what your citizens bring to the table of the global community. And so education remains the most important vehicle through which you can move your citizens out of poverty. It is the pathway to growing prosperity in societies. And we now know that, 21st century is not given. It is for the taking. Africa can take the 21st century. We are young people that are in the world of technology as showing that already. You can see what's going on in terms of the technology revolution. Some of the world's innovation, whether it's in terms of payment systems or other solutions, we're seeing Africa, hold its own. Imagine what would happen when the right policy environment is made available to educated young Africans in the creative industries, in tourism, in financial services, in infrastructure development, in housing, in just name it, in environment, in energy, especially the renewable options of energy. Think in terms of even human capital development, in health, in education. If we can just get these leaders thinking sound policies, sound policies, having the right kinds of priorities of investment in the education, in the health of their people, so that you have healthy human beings who can think well and who can learn well. A key issue that I am addressing now is foundational literacy and numeracy on our continent. Africa's children that are even in school are not learning well enough. There is learning poverty on our continent, and we must fix it. If we fix learning foundationally, then learning as a lifelong activity is made easier.
Thank you so much for doing the interview. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to connecting with you further. You have been listening to She Stands for Peace, the podcast series that explores the state of the women, peace, and security agenda in Africa, asking the central question 20 years after UNSCR 1325, how far have we come? I'm Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, your host, and this podcast was produced by the United Nations Office to the African Union with the generous support of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs.